Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Wonder Buzz. I'm your host, Nate Larson. I hope everyone out there is doing extremely well, and I want to thank all the new listeners who have downloaded Wonder Buzz in the last week. This episode is a solo ride, no guests, just me, a few stories, and some things that are rattling around in my head. Speaking of rattling around, I have been traveling in the Midwest, and for those of you who live in this part of the world, you know the winds are no joke. Traveling on the road with something that's this high profile is okay if the wind is just blowing one direction because you can basically steer into it. But when you start to get these swirling winds, it just feels like you're being beat up when you're driving. And even when I'm stationary and camping, the van has this nice sway to it because the winds are so strong. So it's been an exciting few weeks of driving as I've explored Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, Kansas, and Middle America in general. I've really been enjoying the back roads of these states. Today we'll be talking about some films that I've watched recently: Magazine Dreams, Black Bag, Warfare, and Death of a Unicorn. And I've also had a little run-in at a wildlife management area a few weeks ago that I want to unpack. But before all of that, I thought I would read some of the questions I've received over the last few weeks. Thank you very much for writing in. And if you have a question, email me at podcast@nathanlarson.com. Let me just pull these up here. Okay, the first question: what is the worst night you've ever spent in the van? I get a lot of these doomsday kind of questions, and I think they're from people who really can't imagine living in a van full-time or just living on the road full-time, which I totally understand. But I don't really think of them as the worst nights ever, because looking back on them, they're all part of this much bigger experience for me. So maybe there's just enough distance between me and the bad nights I've had in the van that I just gloss over them at this point. But as I read your question, one night in particular is definitely jumping out at me. I was way up north in the Northwest Territories of Canada, and I was above the Arctic Circle, but I had not gone as far as the Arctic Ocean yet. And there's really just one main road that you can be on when you're trekking towards the Arctic Ocean up there. And the general topography is a lot of tundra and marshlands. And these areas, which are incredibly beautiful, are also full of mosquitoes at certain times of the year. It's hard to explain, but these are swarms of mosquitoes. These are not one or two mosquitoes flying by every once in a while. I was taking my time exploring this area, and I was doing a lot of hiking, and I had a full mosquito repellent suit so I could still be outside and enjoy being out there without having all the blood sucked out of me. But some of the nights you just had to park in these areas where there was really no choice but to just be surrounded by swarms of mosquitoes. You could actually hear them pinging off the metal on the outside of the van. It felt like they were just trying to burrow their way into the van. And while the van is semi-airtight, it is a big box cargo van, and there are gaps. I found very quickly that the mosquitoes could find those gaps and find me. I had all kinds of things I was trying to keep the mosquitoes at bay. I even put on my full mosquito repellent suit that I was wearing when I was hiking to try to get some sleep that night. Even if I wasn't getting bitten, it was just the constant buzzing and knowing they were there that was just making it impossible for me to sleep. Eventually, the best thing for me to do was just to get up and drive and to keep moving up the road. Looking back on it, it was a crazy night with not a lot of sleep. But the plus side I think about at the end of that is I got some really interesting photos that morning because I was out driving at 3, 4, 5 in the morning of wildlife that I didn't normally see or wouldn't normally see because I am not a morning person. Don't tell anybody. So that was probably one of my worst nights in the van. On to the next question. Is there one feature or item you wish you had with you on the road? This is kind of doomsday question adjacent. People like to ask me about things I don't have. And I have a quick answer for this one. It's an oven. I wish I had an oven. I love baking and I like making cookies, and that's not something I've been able to do living on the road in the van. Probably very good for my health, but I miss cookies. I do get people sending me recipes sometimes for pan-fried cookies or skillet cookies, and they're just not the same. It doesn't quite do it for me, or maybe I haven't mastered the technique. So if you do have some really good non-oven cookie recipes, those kind of skillet cookies, I'll definitely keep trying to see if I can master that in the van. Okay, I think we have time for one more listener question. This one reads, Karin seems like a really interesting person. I enjoyed that episode. How exactly did you meet, and is he going to be on future podcasts? Just tell Karin to get his own podcast if you love him so much. Yeah, he is a very interesting person, and I would love to have him on future podcast episodes. I think that's really up to him. I don't like to tell him he's an interesting person because it makes his turban swell, but he is a great guy to talk to about all kinds of subjects. So I'd love to have him back. In regards to the part of your question about how Karin and I met, we met at Brigham Young University. We were both freshmen. I was there for 2 semesters before I transferred out, and Karin went on to become valedictorian of his class because that's just how he does things. We were in a very large dorm. Brigham Young University is huge, and the dorm we were in shared a dining hall. And when I went to that dining hall in the early weeks of school starting, I noticed Karin behind the counter talking to the culinary staff. He stood out because he was the only Sikh in the school and the only person walking around with a turban, and he was back there having these very lively conversations with the culinary staff. And more importantly, I was tracking on how good his food looked when he came out from behind the counter. I was there with my grilled cheese sandwiches, and he had these incredible meals being prepared. It probably is an obvious thing to say, but Brigham Young University was a pretty meat and potato kind of culinary experience. So Karin was working with the culinary staff to up their vegetarian game. And I wanted in on this off-menu selection that Karin had curated with the culinary staff there at BYU. And we struck up a friendship, and that has lasted many, 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 many years. That's the short version of the story. We can ask Karin what his recollection is, but he's not here, so we're going to go with mine as fact. Before we get into the movies themselves, I do want to mention something that now feels like a part of the movie-going ritual. I guess this may be specific to AMC theaters, and that is the Nicole Kidman infomercial that you have to sit through before every single movie. She shows up in a sparkly pantsuit, standing alone in a theater, and delivers this kind of weird monologue about how somehow heartbreak feels good when you're sitting in a theater with your popcorn. It's delivered with such earnestness, and yet I'm not entirely convinced that's actually Nicole Kidman. There's something about her face, just like maybe 30% of it got the memo that this was an acting gig, and the rest stayed home. It's got very big Disney animatronic energy, but I also feel like we may be stuck with this for years. So the flow of movies really now is popcorn, seat, Nicole Kidman animatronic, and then previews. Hey WonderBuzz listeners, this is me interrupting me to tell you about a special offer that is only available for WonderBuzz podcast listeners. Visit nathanlarson.com to get 20% off and free shipping on all orders. Just use the promo code WonderBuzz at checkout. That is 20% off all orders and free shipping when you use promo code WonderBuzz at checkout. nathanlarson.com has hundreds of fine art photos available with multiple print options, whether you are looking for landscapes, abstracts, travel, wildlife, or still life photos. Use promo code WonderBuzz for 20% off and free shipping. Thanks so much. And now back to me. And since I'm mentally wandering around movie theaters for a second, there's also these soda machines in large movie theaters. I think they're called freestyle machines or something like that, or free verse or free the soda, something. And I have for many years enjoyed orange Coke from these machines. I know some of you out there are judging me right now, but believe me, that's only the tip of the iceberg. So you used to be able to go get an orange Coke, and it's not this orange cream soda nonsense that they're pushing on us now, but it was just plain orange Coke, pure, from nature. And they took it out of the machines when they started shoving this orange cream version in everyone's faces over the last year, and honestly, it's just a crime against carbonation. So every time in the last couple weeks where I've gone to one of these movies I'm about to tell you about, I've also been doing a little bit of a soda-based science experiment, trying to remix something that tastes like the original Orange Coke magic, but so far it has been an utter failure. I want you guys to know that I am a scientist at heart, and that project will continue. Okay, so on to the actual movies. While these are not going to be movie reviews, I wanted to express how different the stories were in each of these films that I had seen over the last few weeks, and what kind of feelings that sparked for me. Magazine Dreams is an excruciating little film about a man who wants to become the best bodybuilder in the world and fantasizes about seeing himself on the cover of bodybuilding magazines. It's a type of character study about loneliness and pain and trauma as he spirals more and more into this obsession, and this obsession takes over his life and has all kinds of other consequences. There's a haunting vulnerability to this character and to this movie. It's a film about longing for recognition, for love, for a place in the world, and definitely how masculinity can distort those needs into something very, very tragic. It's a very heavy film, but it lingers, or at least it lingered with me in a very good way. Two quick notes about this film before I move on. One is I think you could make an argument that this entire film is in our main character's head. He's a very unreliable narrator to begin with, and the first scene in the movie when he goes to work out in his garage and the last scene in the movie when he goes out to work in his garage, I think you could make an argument that everything that happens in between is just a fantasy. Again, very far-fetched, but I think you could make the argument. The other thing I want to mention is that the lead actor for this film was convicted of misdemeanor assault and harassment, and that led to the film losing its distribution deal, or whatever the terminology is for that, and so it sat around for a very long time before it was released. I think it's worth having that context going into the film because of what the film is dealing with. And if you are someone who appreciates acting performances, this is definitely worth seeing. It's just having the context of the film and the people who made the film as you go into it. So that is Magazine Dreams. Definitely recommend. Black Bag is the next film that I saw, which is a slick little spy flick from Steven Soderbergh. The cinematography is very cool. It has a nice washed out tone to it. Very organic camera work, as with all of his films. The plot twists are a little familiar, but there is something very satisfying about watching it all unfold. So even though it's not reinventing the genre, it's definitely a lot of fun and doesn't take itself super seriously. I should mention that I saw these first two movies totally alone. Big empty theaters, just me and Nicole Kidman. They were private screenings because I am a fancy van life guy. And I mention that because the next movie that I saw, Death of a Unicorn, I did see with an audience, but I feel like I was seeing a totally different movie because I found Death of a Unicorn to be laugh out loud funny, and the audience around me did not seem to find the humor in it. It's a totally absurd premise, but the premise also allows for some really great social commentary. The story kicks off when a father and daughter hit a unicorn on their way to a big meeting, a very important meeting for the father, and it turns into this satire about biotech and greed and capitalism. And Will Poulter plays Shepard Leopold, the entitled heir of this pharmaceutical empire, who sees the unicorn not as a mystical being, but as a revenue stream. And the film kind of walks this tightrope between being very absurd and somewhat of a monster thriller and an allegory at the same time. I think it's a ton of fun. I think Paul Rudd's great. I think Will Poulter is amazing. And it's a very unique movie from that very unique studio, A24. The last film that I saw is Warfare. And the only thing I really want to say about this film is that I found it to be a refreshingly different take on these military conflict movies where you're supposed to feel like you're embedded with the military unit. This movie takes its time. There's a lot of quiet in this movie. In fact, I would say the silent parts hit somewhat harder than the firefights that are in the movie. And it is dealing certainly with the psychology and the chaos that is involved with the battle that's in the story, but also this unraveling that is going on inside each of these characters that we're introduced to. Will Poulter is also in this film, and he plays the stoic leader of this group. He's trying to hold everything together, not only tactically, but also emotionally. An incredible performance again. And I would definitely recommend this movie too. I do want to wrap up the movie section with a bit of a Will Poulter appreciation moment. He was hilarious in a comedic, satirical role in Death of a Unicorn. He was fantastic in Warfare. He was in the most recent season of The Bear. Just excellent performances from an actor who has a ton of range. I think the reason I wanted to bring this segment to the podcast is not so much for movie reviews, because that is not what you just heard, but more that I was reminded in seeing these 4 films back to back in great theaters without Coke about how much cinema can inspire curiosity and creativity in me. A great movie with a great soundtrack is really something that can inspire you and introduce you to entire new worlds or these new levels of feeling and emotion about a particular subject. So this was a great reminder for me, seeing all these films together. They opened up my mind to some other creative ideas that I have and some other things that I want to write. And looking at any kind of story that is portrayed so well on screen, whether it's something as crazy as Death of a Unicorn or something as serious as Warfare, can be an inspirational spark. Fine, Nicole Kidman, I hear you. Fine. So a little movie love segment for today. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you've seen any of these films, I'd love to hear what you thought about them. Let's switch gears in a major way here and talk about an experience I had at a wildlife management park in Florida that led me to learn about an entire world I have thought nothing about, and that is feral pigs. I was spending a lot of time in this wildlife management area doing 3, 4, 5-mile hikes. One morning, I was out on one of those hikes and heard some rustling down in the brush and the trees. I figured it was going to be squirrels or birds that would come flying out from the brush. But it was 2 piglets that ran across the trail, which definitely caught me off guard. I mean, I knew wild pigs were out there, or feral pigs were out there. I just hadn't seen any. What really caught my attention was 20 more pigs came running across the trail of all shapes and all sizes. It was what I was calling a herd of pigs. It looked like a flash mob of pigs. Over the course of that hike, I spooked several more large herds of pigs. I found out later that the correct term is sounder, a sounder of pigs, which sounds oddly dignified for what is essentially a moving demolition crew. These feral pigs are considered to be one of the most destructive invasive species in Florida and neighboring states like Georgia. They root up farmland, they destroy crops, they compete with native species, and they erode natural habitats. And seeing that firsthand was really interesting, and later gave me an appreciation for just how big this problem has become. Their rooting behavior just tears through fields. They uproot plants, they damage water quality by creating a lot of erosion and sedimentation issues. And there are estimated to be about 500,000 of these feral pigs in Florida alone, and somewhere north of 6 million feral pigs in the U.S. States are trying to figure out what the economic impact of the feral pigs might be. A state like Georgia has come out with numbers that feral pigs have done $150 million in just agricultural damage alone every year. And that number's in the billions when you start to look at it nationwide. And the real kicker is that they breed very fast. A sow can start reproducing at just 6 months old and can have 2 litters a year that each have 5 or 10 piglets per litter. So one sounder can turn into a full-blown demolition invasion crew in just a few seasons. And that's what I was running into on these hikes, these sounders of pigs that have just bred and exploded in size and are running roughshod through the land there. In fact, I am starting to see a new A24 movie coming together here, maybe something along the lines of Cocaine Bear, the story of one pig who wants to train and lift weights to become the biggest pig of all, and who makes friends with a super spy unicorn to create a tactical black ops unit that takes out humans one by one. Somebody get me Nicole Kidman's number. So to simply maintain the current population of these feral pigs, the wildlife management official that I talked to said that 60 to 70% of them need to be removed every year. And that's just to maintain the current size of the population, not to reduce them. And that's why many wildlife management areas are actively encouraging hunting. Some areas have no bag limits and no seasons, and they permit hunting year-round. It's one of the few animals where you're not just allowed to hunt, but you're expected to hunt, which brings me to this conversation. All of that was really background for this conversation that I had when I was trying to leave the wildlife management area. I pulled up to the gate to exit, and sometimes there are staffed gates where they are checking when hunters come through to make sure, everything's been done properly. And the woman approached my van and she asked me some questions about what I'd been hunting. I explained to her that I wasn't hunting at all, that I had just been there to hike and enjoy the wildlife and was spending time outdoors. And I showed her my permit that I had for being in the area. And she kind of took a moment and paused and she said, "Well, why aren't you hunting?" And I said, "Well, I don't have a gun." And her response was, "Well, I can get you a gun. We have guns here. You need to go kill some pigs. Everyone is supposed to be killing pigs." And I kind of smiled, not sure if she was joking or not, because she was playing it very straight. I don't think she was joking, but when she saw that I wasn't going to jump at the chance to grab a gun and go hunt some pigs right then, she waved me off, clearly very disappointed. That one conversation I had leaving the wildlife management area led to me diving into the world of feral pigs the next week and getting the kind of information that I was just sharing with you, talking to some wildlife management officials and doing some research. It's not so much about the pigs, it's more about how these experiences we have when we travel, whether it's seeing a vista or architecture or a museum or these random conversations you can have with people, or certainly for me, when I see things in nature, they can open up your eyes to whole topics that you never really even thought about before, and almost always lead to you understanding how we are very connected and our world is very interconnected more than we realize. And I gain an appreciation from that, whether it's through movies or through feral pigs. Well, that's it for this week of Wonder Buzz. There's really no possible way to summarize a podcast episode that includes wild pigs, Nicole Kidman, and a little mini rant about soda machines. But that is Wonder Buzz this week. If you've got pig stories or movie recommendations or proof of life on Nicole Kidman, please drop me a line at podcast@nathanlarson.com. I want to thank Aaron, Robert, Samantha, and James for their photography orders this week. I am especially excited to see some of these 5-foot wide prints that have been ordered recently. You can find my photography, poems, and this podcast at nathanlarson.com. Or look for me on one of the social media sites owned by the oligarch of your choice, including Instagram at Nathan Larson Photo. There's a link in the show notes to support the podcast. Every little bit is appreciated. Keep exploring, stay curious, and I'll see you next time on Wonder Buzz.